Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. We have kind of a full house and a full schedule this evening. And tonight we have Matt Dietrich, who in a few minutes I'm going to introduce. He's going to do a presentation. I'll give him a little introduction before that. But before we get into the schedule or any introduction, I just want to have not a sad announcement, but I guess it is sad. If you don't know already, the Advanced Imaging Conference is no more. I've gone to it for almost 10 years, every other year. Most of us in the room have gone or tried to go. And it was a time to really meet people whose images you saw and maybe you corresponded with, and they all gathered in one place in San Diego. And we had a great time. But for various economic reasons, there is no more Astro Imaging channel. And in honor of that, I am wearing if you can't see it already, my 2015 special Advanced Imaging Conference. So AIC, rest in peace. We really enjoyed that. I don't mean to
TAIC
be,
is still here.
yeah, AIC, yes, TAIC is still here, but AIC, that's good memory. By the way, they are posting all of their presentations, all of the people that went out there. So if those of you who haven't heard of it or want to go back and review it, they are going to make that available, I think, to everyone. So I'm just going to share my screen just for a moment. Present now. Come on. Present entire screen. So our schedule is, I don't want to say it's filling up. We could always need more presenters, and anyone out there that has an interest should let us know through the email that's on our site that you would like to make a presentation. But we have a really nice sequence of shows coming up. Matt tonight, Tim Martin, who's going to give a brief introduction of what he's going to do it, Gordon Telepin, who's been on before, and of course we have Super Bowl, which we're not going to have a show, and John Talbot, Salvatore Iovine. I think remember Salvatore is a guy who runs Astrobin, which we're probably all members of. Myself and Tim are going to do a little program on how to photograph the eclipse and so on and so on. I can just scroll down. There are empty time periods, and if you have an interest, let us know, and we'll try to get you on the schedule. So let me stop sharing. So before we get to Matt, Tim Martin's going to be on next week, and Tim, why don't you just give us a brief introduction on what you're going to talk about?
Well, sure. Well, compared to all you guys, I'm really very much a neophyte at this. I'm still a newbie. Malcolm Gladwell said you need about 10,000 hours to develop an expertise in a complex discipline. So, based on my Astrobin integration time as a kind of a guideline, I'm about maybe halfway there. I still feel like it's less than that. So what I'm going to talk about is all the things that I've learned in the last 4 years and had to unlearn, and all the people who've helped me do that. And there's so many of them out there, Ron Breacher and Tolga, and so many others who've helped me tremendously along the way. And then the people I look up to, many of you are, many of them here on the screen right now. So that's really what I'm going to talk about is all mainly all the mistakes I've made, how I've worked around them, and the people who've helped me through it.
Thanks, Tim. And again, I don't want to be discouraging about number of hours, but I saw a program, I can't remember where it was, and it was about developing technical expertise in craft, and it was called 40,000 hours. So 40,000 hours. So I started counting, and I got we all have a little ways to go to get 40,000 hours. So Matt Dietrich, I've known Matt for a few years. He did my installation of my PlaneWave instrument out at the SRO, but now he's moved on from PlaneWave. He works for a company called Sea West Observatories, and does complete installations. But tonight, I think he's going to tell us a little bit more about that, but he's going to talk more about some of his other astrophotography, the Widefield landscape, which I would love to do, but kind of don't have the time or expertise to do it. So, Matt, you want to give us a little more introduction, and we'll turn the program over to you.
Sure. I'll go ahead and at least turn on the title slide here. Okay, let me know if you guys can see the title slide.
We can see it.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, it's a pleasure being with you guys. I remember giving a talk for TAIC, I think back in 2021 it was. And during that talk, I discussed, I think, a lot of the plane wave technology and some of the installs that we did. But the current day job is I'm a program manager for C-West observatories. So we do design build of observatories. We do dome automation, dome retrofits, installations of plane wave telescopes as well. It's kind of one of our main telescope providers. So we do a lot of the system integration side. But during this talk today, what I wanted to discuss was one of the passions that kind of, I guess, keeps me interested in of course, just being outside underneath the night sky, which is probably one of the reasons that a lot of us got into the hobby of astrophotography. So with this talk, I want to cover nightscape and wide angle astrophotography with some fun new equipment that a lot of you might already have at home. So it's a great way to get into adding on a new skill set to your astrophotography, and just a new way to explore the night sky, right? Being out underneath a dark sky with the Milky Way. Many of you could probably remember the first time that happened. I remember it back in 2008 in Colorado, Glenwood Springs. We were on a family vacation, and that was going to be the first night I was going to be able to witness the Milky Way. And I still picture that night. It was one of the coolest things ever. And taking a few photos of it with, I had a Canon 40D at the time. To me, it was the nicest camera I owned at this point. But with that talk over the course of this presentation, I just want to go through, share the passion, the experience for some of this type of imaging, and hopefully get you guys to shoot nightscapes and wide field imaging. Right? It's a great field to be in. It uses very minimal equipment, so I hope by the end of this presentation, you'll want to grab your camera and tripod and shoot a few nightscapes this upcoming season. Like most of us, we commonly begin our passion for astronomy when we're kids, and my experience was no different. I remember leafing through books in elementary school, different planets and Jupiter, Saturn, everything. Just the awe and the wonder really got me into the curiosity of the night sky and astronomy in general. And fast forward a few years, ended up wanting a Christmas gift, didn't know what to ask for, and I was taking an astronomy class. So at the time in 10th grade, I ended up asking for a telescope, and my folks got me a Meade ETX 80, very similar to the one pictured in this photo here. So I thought it was one of the coolest things I ever got. I was able to have the views of Saturn for the first time in a telescope of my own. But what really got me into just wanting to photograph the night sky was on the box of that Meade telescope. You had a CCD image of a nebula and planets, which I had no clue about. So what I thought on the box is what it was going to be seen through the telescope, right? I was so naive back then. I really thought that what you see on the box of these companies is what you're going to get through the telescope. So, of course, as you know, I was sorely mistaken. False advertising got me into the hobby, and how difficult it was to try to take photos. I really just became addicted to trying to find a way to actually make an image work. So, like many of you, the troubleshooting, the systems integration, the engineering, and just the perseverance behind astrophotography was something that really grabs a lot of us in this field. It's very special to share that. All of us can relate to it. But I wanted to take photos and share that with my friends and family. So back in 2008, I remember some of these images finally started working. I took a telescope. It was a piggyback Astro 66 millimeter. I put on my C8, and we were up in Cherry Springs State Park in Pennsylvania. But it was crazy because I was still using that Canon 40D, but I was so excited because I just was able to even get the dumbbell in the field of view, which you can see it in this image. But looking back now, we all know there's so many issues wrong with these photos, but the field rotation, because my polar alignment was off, the coma, astigmatism, all that stuff of just learning new optics and trying to set up. But at the time, I thought it was the coolest thing because, I'm shooting a planetary nebula that's in our galaxy here. It was one of the neatest things to experience and see that on the back of that Canon camera. It was a monumental kind of experience that I'll look back on, and enjoying the first real photo that you shoot with a camera in astrophotography was special. But, when you start realizing a recipe for success and you kind of learn and improve, and like Eric was mentioning, in this hobby, there's so many people that we learn from, Warren Keller, Tony Hallis, all the guys that have been around doing this for so many decades. Those were the people that I looked up to and I idolized, and reached out and tried to learn from their tutorials and everything. But the biggest thing that I started to finally have those aha moments was I needed to get my equipment out of the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I need to get them to dark skies. I needed to capture as much light as possible, which meant like fast focal ratio. Collect as much light with the aperture as well was a huge aha moment for me, in just understanding that if I can try to get at least a minimum of 3 hours, which is so funny that now we shoot a lot of times remote, and we can commonly shoot 40, 50, 60 hours on a target. Back then in the Pittsburgh weather, you're lucky if you got a couple clear nights a month, and even if they're clear, you might have clouds passing. So trying to get 3 hours in a row of data was really what I started to learn and understand and appreciate with deep space astrophotography. So that was in 2011. And in 2012, I linked up with a friend online on one of those astronomy forums on Yahoo groups. He had an observatory in West Virginia that him and his wife would go use during new moon. They would camp, and they invited me to come down. So I brought my equipment down. So we'd be set up at Spruce Knob, West Virginia, just photographing the night sky with our telescopes. But, I thought it was one of the coolest things because we're going from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, all the way down there, just driving down by myself. And the landscape and the geology of that area was spectacular. So for me, I wanted to try to share that experience of what we were, witnessing underneath those dark skies. I mean, that was the first time you can just lay out in the meadow there in West Virginia, and it's 4,500 feet elevation, so it's pretty high up on the East Coast. But the Milky Way is fantastic. That's really when I started to shoot a couple nightscape images, and I didn't even realize that they were called nightscapes. I just wanted to come back and show people, hey, this is something we can't witness in the light polluted suburbs of Pittsburgh, but check this out. You guys should go check out West Virginia, or in general, just the night sky. So that was my entry into nightscape shooting, was in 2012. And it was all about just getting people to understand what is out there in the night sky away from city lights, and want to inspire people to get out there and witness and experience those views. So it was fun to photograph the equipment behind the scenes. So with nightscapes in general, going through, like, if you just have basic equipment, camera and a lens and the tripod, people want to use technology now to help them. So I didn't have this technology back in 2012 yet, but this app you can use called Photo Pills. This on the left is a screenshot of my phone. So basically in Bryce Canyon, we were trying to plan with that app. You can change with the scroll of your thumb. You could just point your camera and you can change the positioning of the Milky Way based on time. So it'll show you, hey, this photo was taken May 9th of 2021 at, it's going to be at 1:48 in the morning. That's where the Milky Way is going to be. So basically, if you use that technology to help plan a nightscape, if you want to get out and photograph a Milky Way over a certain object, if you want to plan the moon rising, something like that, you can use Photo Pills as a good app to download for your phone. And we went came back later that night and shot a very similar scene like this on the right to get that view. But just planning a nightscape with apps is really beneficial nowadays, because you can go to locations, you can scout during the daytime, and then you can go back if it's clear that night, and you can go back and capture and create in your mind what you just saw during the daytime. So it's pretty neat. The other good piece of software that a lot of you may already use is Stellarium here. That is another good free piece of software that you can use, and just as a planetarium for deep space astrophotography. But you could use it for planning, the positioning of the Milky Way, different locations on the planet. So I like to use both PhotoPills and Stellarium for running different planning sessions before getting out into the field. With a little bit of understanding of kind of what the planning is going to take, if you go out and photograph the Milky Way, you might ask yourself, there's so many techniques that you can use. It could either be a single frame. If you want to get multiple images to create a really large print, you can create a panorama. I love shooting panoramas. I became addicted to shooting them back in 2015 and even earlier, because you start taking your camera and you start panning it, you can get that Milky Way arcing across the sky like you're seeing it in person. So the Milky Way lends itself already to want to be shot in a panorama format. With time-lapse videos as another technique for nightscapes, you can capture meteor showers, you can capture the Milky Way rising and setting. You can capture, fog in a valley with the Milky Way. There's really a lot of cool things you can do with time lapses. And of course, when you're taking just single frames in time lapse videos as well, you can take the time lapse video and you can turn it into a star trail image. Multiple data sets if you just shoot a time lapse video, because you can get a single frame. You can have your really cool time-lapse video, and then you can also turn them into star trails with that time-lapse footage. So it's really neat. Another good example that's kind of really popular nowadays is you can use a portable tracker, a little portable, equatorial tracker to shoot long exposures of the Milky Way, and you can capture really good detail just like we do in our deep space astrophotography. So a few of those techniques, once you have an understanding of the scene and how you planned it and where the positioning of the Milky Way is going to be, you are going to ask yourself, how do I want to capture it and present it? And a lot of times single frames can do a fine job of sharing the experience of the night sky. In this example, we were up at Cerro Tololo in Chile. Standing in front of those observatories is just unbelievable. I mean, that observatory's got to be it's probably 150 feet tall. It's something unbelievable. That's the Blanco telescope on Cerro Tololo, and it houses, I think, the 4.2 meter Blanco telescope. It's just, the thing is absolutely monstrous. But the scale, if you go and take a single photo, you can put the timer on your camera. You can go run into the field of view. With this one, it was just a 14 millimeter lens to capture the Milky Way over the Blanco telescope there. And if you just stand super still far away, that's when you can get a cool perspective of standing underneath the Milky Way. People can relate to that because, of course, it's something you understand the scale, the size. Just being underneath that night sky is a great way with single photos to showcase the night sky and the experience. This was another one. This is Rodrigo and Felipe and myself at Obstec Observatory. We do a lot of installations at Obstec Observatory. It's a fantastic remote observing site. They have well over 100 telescopes now that are run internationally by people, and you could rent pier spots. They're incredible people to spend time with, and I have so many memories because I've installed just probably well over 10 plane wave telescopes down there, for people, plane wave 1 meters, 0.7 meters, the 60 centimeters Delta Rho telescopes, really everything. Being underneath those night skies is so incredible. The nights, the weather is usually really calm. There's no wind typically at night, and you just have the core of the Milky Way overhead. It's unbelievable. And I tell people, when you have the Milky Way that high, it takes two hands to block out the width of the core, in Sagittarius. There's something special about witnessing that in the Southern Hemisphere. And a lot of times we'll do barbecue at night. So this was a fun way to have us stand still. And this was probably like a 5-second photo with the Milky Way setting behind us. It was a cool experience that I just wanted to capture our friends at the observatory that, they're like family now. So it's the people and the equipment and being underneath the night sky. This was the one that we set up, this PlaneWave CDK 600 system that we run, and the large and small Magellanic clouds behind the equipment. And again, just another single exposure with the equipment with a really fast lens. That's what's really powerful, to capture just a lot of light really quick, just like our telescopes. And in this situation, this was another 14 millimeter lens, f1.8. And usually I do ISO 1600 or ISO 6400. With the Sony a7S III, it has super big pixels, so it can pretty much see in the dark. So you can do really short exposures at low ISOs. Once you kind of master shooting, single photos, you're going to notice, of course, you guys have seen the Milky Way. You're going to see that the Milky Way, it doesn't arc like you see in this photograph, but it's straight across the night sky, and it's rising on the horizon early in the season. And of course, later in the season, it'll lay on the horizon when it's setting. So capturing all of that in one single photograph can be very difficult. So that's why I mentioned before, Milky Way lends itself to panorama shooting. And all a panorama is stitching multiple images that are overlapped with one another. So you're basically just moving the camera one position at a time after you shoot the photo with just enough ample overlap. And you can also call this a mosaic. It's just like when we do our deep space astrophotography, this is what you would call a mosaic. You have to have ample overlap, and with the equipment, it lets you capture incredible phenomenon like this one outside of Kanab, Utah, the green air glow in the clouds after the storm pushed through, and the Hydrogen Alpha of the Sator region and the North American Nebula. All of those are crazy bright. And panoramas are a great way to showcase the land, the geology of an area, and of course pair that with the night sky. It can be very compelling. And with capturing panoramas, as a little tutorial, you can use this kind of basic advice of start easy with a 14 millimeter lens. A 24 millimeter lens is certainly doable as well. You can use that. But I would recommend a 14 millimeter lens because it's going to give you so much additional overlap space that it's going to make it almost impossible for you to not have overlap when you stitch these images together. The key about composing the shot, this one I shot back in 2015 in Badlands National Park. And in hindsight, what I would have done is, instead of doing landscape orientation with the camera, I would have flipped my camera and done portrait. So those are things that you learn over time, but find the way that you want to compose the shot. When you're in the field, you have a ball head on your tripod, and that lets you move the camera at different angles. So you level the tripod, and then you're going to focus the camera on a really bright star like Vega, or if Jupiter is up, or Antares, something that is nice and bright. You can focus on that star in live view with your camera, and you can capture a test frame. So a good test frame, you can try, 15 seconds to 30 seconds, somewhere in there, depending on your camera. An ISO 6400 is a good place with a, f2.8 lens as a minimum is really good. If you start having lenses that are f3.2 or commonly f4, they're not going to let in enough light for nightscapes. So you really want to try to invest in an f1.4, an f2.8, or even sometimes there's Sony now has an f1.8 14 millimeter lens that I like shooting with now. But you're going to take the frame and you're going to shoot one of them, and then you're going to move approximately 30% to the next frame, and you're just going to keep the camera level every time you move it. And the good thing with these cameras nowadays is you have a level that's built into the camera, so you can see it and make sure that you're staying level, and it's going to help it stitch later in software. So just going through and showing some of these with the Badlands there, showing the green air glow is just spectacular that night. And there was even a little bit of aurora on the left-hand side. Again, this was in 2015. So back then they were still experiencing the solar maximum, which we're kind of back into at this point in time. But the square box on the top is kind of showing you this is the field of view and this is the raw frame out of the camera on the bottom. So you shoot that photo and then I move the camera over and I shoot a little bit. And then I do the same thing, move the camera and I shoot another frame. Do it one more time. You know, you have the summer triangle, you have the air glow, and I'm starting to pick up that little bit of aurora on the left-hand side. And then I'd finish it off with one more frame of the road, and those are the frames. So you can tell if I blink in between them, go back and forth, you can tell that there's an ample overlap because Vega and Deneb are up high. There's going to be tons of room for us to stitch these photos in software. So that's going to be important as you check in the frame that you got both images with tons of overlap. And at the end of the day, you can put all the images together in different pieces of software. PT GUI is an option. There used to be a software called AutoPanic Giga that you might still be able to get download for. Photoshop does a decent job sometimes, but not 100%. Another piece of software you can try for the Windows users is Microsoft ICE, Image Composite Editor. It's free. It's defunct, but you can still get the download, and that one usually works really well. But again, learning experience. On this photo, I would have gone and I would have taken the camera and shot it in portrait mode instead of landscape, and I would have shot more ground. Because when you shoot tons of foreground as well, then in editing, I can crop the images, right? You know, you can go through and you can have more flexibility in how you edit the photos later, because think towards the end, if you want to just share them online, that's one thing. But if you're cropping them to kind of a standard 3x2 format, or or the 4x6 format basically, or 5x7, you want to remember that if you're going to make a print with these images, you want to be able to crop them when you're editing, because sometimes you have to stretch the image and get them to fit that canvas to what you're going to print, 5x7 or 3x2. With panoramas, you can really get into kind of going out of control really quickly. Case in point, I just term this just mega panoramas, because with a tracker device, the iPano from Ioptron, it lets you take panoramas and it kind of does them robotically, because with this image, this was with a 50mm lens. So you're capturing a lot less sky per image. So if you start missing an overlap, you're not going to be able to stitch the frame, and all of a sudden you'd have like a hole in the middle of your panorama. So with using that Ioptron iPano, you can kind of set it, and as long as your tripod's level, it goes through and it shoots all these images really quickly. And this was all untracked. This was in the Atacama Desert of Chile. The air glow was absolutely unbelievable. The ripples in the upper atmosphere you can see in the air glow is just spectacular. And then on the right-hand side, you have the zodiacal light setting. So with that arcing Milky Way, you can really start getting into pretty crazy mega panoramas. That was 72 images with a Nikon D810A. So it let in a lot of that hydrogen alpha wavelength. So it's really fun to do big panoramas, because you can get so much sky and you can see phenomena like air glow and the zodiacal light if you're under really good dark skies. Playing around with the stitching software and what are called the projections. This was one, I haven't posted this one, but for some reason I was playing around with it. This was at Obstec in Chile, again, the Obstec Observatory. And I played around with what's called that tiny Earth projection. When you stitched all these with a 14mm lens, you just kind of take your camera and you shoot the whole night sky, and then you tip down and you start focusing your camera on the ground, and you just shoot as much ground as you can. And when you start stitching these, you can play with the projections and you can get really cool effects. And in this one, you saw the Milky Way here, beautiful hydrogen alpha in the night sky, the air glow, this red air glow. that's in the night sky there. It's incredible what the cameras can pick up. So that's not a color balance issue. It's actually red air glow in the upper atmosphere, just glowing. The zodiacal light, and then there's even the Gegenschein that's on the opposite side, you can see on the right. So it's pretty neat when you do those wide angle images under dark skies, that not only do you have air glow, you have zodiacal light, but you also have the Gegenschein as well, just reflecting off dust in the solar system. It's super fun to do those. Time-lapse videos, that was another good Nightscape technique, that with this basic equipment of camera, lens, and tripod, you guys can take that equipment and you can go. I mean, we're talking very minimal equipment, super portable, nice wide angle 14 millimeter lens. Again, this was up at Cerro Tololo in Chile, and just with the moon rising, the Milky Way underneath, above the domes there on Cerro Tololo. So that's pretty cool. You can make really neat videos. You can do, we'll go to the next one here. You can also set up, if you feel gung-ho about it with time lapses. We were on a flight down to Chile, and it was actually, this was, I think, one of the first flights after COVID, when they opened the borders up in Chile to come down. And I was the only person in one of the sections of the plane, so I was able to set up the time lapse going by the window. And you have to do something really hard to actually get the camera up against the window and the tripod, and I had to use masking tape with a blanket to kind of hide all the reflections, because when you're shooting through the glass, you get all these weird reflections in the plane. Yeah, so it's pretty neat if you can make it work. I knew I had to obviously get the lens and everything covered in as tight to the window as possible, and cover it on other experiences trying to photograph the Milky Way out of a plane. So with that example, it's really neat, and I'm surprised it turned out. But we were flying over the Atlantic Ocean, probably past the Gulf of Mexico, and going over towards the tip of South America. So that was pretty cool. With time lapse from a plane, you can really start doing some unique imaging with that. Oops. With star trails, now that you have a time lapse video, you can take that time lapse video, and as long you can't do it if it was a moving situation per se, like the one on the plane. If the foreground was stationary, like you just have your tripod setting set up and it's running, as long as the foreground doesn't move and you don't pick the tripod up, you can take your star trails data, and just that turns all into those beautiful trailed effect of the stars in the night sky as the Earth is rotating. So, a minimum of 200 images, you can get a decent bit. This was slightly over 200 images. They were 8-second images. And this was, again, during the Mount Rainier trip that I was there in 2015. This was the Northern Lights that we had during the experience there. This was, we were teaching night sky education, and one of the guys was trying to take some photos of the night sky. So we were giving him tips, and we showed him how to photograph stuff. And sure enough, there was a little bit of pink at the visitor center facing Mount Rainier to the north. And at the end of my shift, I went down to the lake, and because I wanted a view to the north, because that's where the Northern Lights come down off of. And this is what happened. The first time I got to witness the Northern Lights, it was spectacular. It was emotional. And the whole back of the 24 millimeter lens with that Nikon camera was pink. The whole back of the screen was pink in just a single 8-second photo, and the fog on Reflection Lake was moving. So it was really cool. But ironically, that was the first Star Trails photo I ever did. And my astronomy teacher that got me into this back when I was a kid, at the beginning of this talk, she wanted me to try Star Trails back then. And I laugh joking now, because this photo, eventually the Park Service, they utilized it for a USPS postage stamp back to celebrate the centennial. So my astronomy teacher back then, she was laughing, saying that she was glad that I waited to capture the first Star Trails. So it was a worthwhile shot. But you never know when you're shooting those kind of images that you start sharing them and people are going to notice them, and they look at them as artwork, right? It's not just a scientific endeavor to us to share just digitally, but making prints, and people want to keep them as keepsakes and hang them on their wall. So when you make star trails, you're really getting into a realm of being able to then make prints with images and share them with people in your community and online. One additional, I'm going to wrap up this section with the track long exposure. So this technique is just using, a tracking mount, which I'm going to show in this next setup of Widefield imaging, but using a small tracker like, an Ioptron, Skywatcher, Star Adventurer. There's, I think, a Benro, a couple of these smaller portable tracker mounts you can use and capture long exposures of the night sky. And that's what we did with this shot, just a 60-second image, but it was tracked. So you get a lot more detail in the core of the Milky Way, in the dark horse, Rho Ophiuchi, in the beautiful reflection nebulas that are going on there. You can just make them out above the light pollution of Springdale, Utah, there over the bridge. But that's just a single image, and you brighten up the foreground a little bit and share the track night sky. It's a little bit more equipment heavy, even with a portable tracker. You're carrying a one additional piece of equipment, and with a wide enough lens, you're far enough away from your subject in the foreground that everything doesn't just blur, which is good. So you can also blend images, and if you want to like keep just your foreground nice and stationary and shut the tracker off, and you can, in Photoshop, you can put those as layers and turn them into one single beautiful photo. I know a lot of people might be curious about kind of the editing technique. So in this example, I just wanted to show an image that we photographed during my workshop down in San Pedro de Atacama in Chile. This was a raw image during the workshop I was teaching down there this past summer for students. They wanted to learn, of course, Nightscape imaging and editing. So in this situation, I stood in the photograph to, again, show the scale and to relate to it. And with that Sony A7S III, a 30-second image, the lens was at f1.8, and it was shot at ISO 1600. So you can take those images. In this example, I just pulled it into Adobe Camera Raw. You could also use Lightroom. It's going to have the same exact functionality, but the first step is, now that we have the image open, we're going to color balance, and you can see between these frames, all I did was, you need to find a area of blank background sky, very high. You don't want to do it down low where you have potential air glow or light pollution, but you can just use the eyedropper tool to color balance on an area of blank sky. And another technique to do this is, if you jack the vibration and saturation to 100%, you can customize the temperature and tint to try to make the colors more equal in terms of RGB. You try to get them equal, values to, like, say 30, 30, and 30. So then the high background sky was nice and balanced. So with the color balance done, you can use basically an artificial flat frame, which is super cool. You can use the lens profile. So it knew that I was shooting with a Sony 14mm lens. So it automatically calibrated with a lens profile from Adobe. So you can see, in terms of removing some of the vignetting, vignetting is helpful to keep a subject's eye in the frame, but in this situation, it's nice to remove some of it, and you can always add it back in a little bit later. With my type of editing that I like to do for nightscapes, I try to keep them somewhat natural to what the experience was like for me underneath the night sky. So the way that I achieve that is, I mask the sky, and then I edit that, and then I also have the foreground, and I edit that. So I basically edit two images. And with the new masking tools, this was super easy. I did this whole image edit in like 10 minutes yesterday. It automatically knew the sky, and you can edit to taste to increase the whites, increase the exposure, the contrast, and reduce the blacks to make it darker. So now you have just a slightly edited night sky. There was some air glow in the night sky that night, and you could play around with it because it's masked, and it's nice and feathered too, so you don't get any hard lines on your sky to foreground. And with that same technique, you can select the sky and then you just right click the little picture window in the mask, and it's going to ask you to invert it, and then you can invert. Now you just have the ground selected, so you can do the same thing, and you can adjust the brightness. You can add color, change the shadows, darken it, and then all of a sudden you have an image where you can see the foreground, and myself standing in it with that Milky Way at the observatory there. So you go from an image that was really dark in camera to something that's somewhat subtle, and then you can always edit it to taste. But all said and done, Nightscape editing, before and after, here's a finished image, and this took me 5 to 10 minutes to edit yesterday, right? It's Nightscape imaging is really neat because the editing side can be really quick. You can go as quicker as long as you need to, but it's a little different than our traditional deep space astrophotography editing, where we can spend days editing images to make them right. But I wanted to have you guys, see a couple tips and tricks on the editing side to show you raw in camera to on the right hand side, a little bit of saturation. I brightened up the shadows a little bit and just brightened up the Milky Way just a tiny bit. So it's pretty simple in Photoshop to do the masking techniques now. It's pretty cool. So if there were no questions on the Nightscape side of that, I was going to jump into a little bit more of the advanced side now that people know about
Matt,
some of the Nightscapes. Yeah.
Matt, what are the range of exposures, and when do you decide exposure times? When do you decide which exposure you'll use? What guides your determination of the exposure, ISO settings, and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So once is depending on your camera, but just like when we do deep space editing, there's a little different in knowing the sub exposure, if you will. With Nightscapes, what you like to do is you like to look at the histogram on the back of the camera screen. But traditionally, if you're under a dark sky, if you have a lens that's f2.8, and if you're shooting at, say, ISO 6400 from a site with the Milky Way visible, like, somewhere between a 15 to 30-second image of the Milky Way is going to be pretty darn good. So, as long as you have an f2.8 lens or faster, that 30-second image as kind of the longest one you could do on a static tripod is a good rule of thumb. But the histogram as well is going to help you see, if you shifted the data to the right, just like when we do our stretching. So I guess looking at the histogram of an edited image here, or I'll scroll back. So this, you can see the histogram on the right of on this image. It's shifted to the left because the foreground's really dark. But by the time I'm done editing, look at how the histogram is shifted a little bit to the right. So I kind of took the darks off of the left-hand wall, and I shifted everything to the right a little bit. So when you're shooting in the field, you can change your shutter speed, your exposure time, and then your ISO. That's the only two things you should change with Nightscapes. I recommend leaving the lens wide open. So then you're only changing two variables. You're changing shutter speed and you're changing the ISO, depending on how well your camera can handle noise. And that histogram is something you can set up in your camera to see. But if you can follow the histogram, that's what's going to lead you to a good exposure that you can edit later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we will jump into a little bit adding on the portability of a tracker, going from Nightscape imaging, which is typically just a camera and a lens and a tripod, with Nightscapes. With Widefield, this is a good field to shoot in with the portability of a tracker nowadays that could even just be battery powered, right? Those Star Adventurers, you have the Ioptron ones, those are still battery. What's new now that we picked up was a ZWO AM5, and that's a little different in terms of the equipment needed to run it. But you can start super basic with something like a Star Adventurer, like seen in this photo with the Large Magellanic Cloud in the background. That's pretty cool to shoot. And all you need is a camera lens. You could even get into shooting with a little bit longer of a focal length, like a 250 millimeter focal length Red Cat 51, those optics are really good for playing around with some nice wide field images, you know, of row of Fuchsi, of the Trifid paired with the Lagoon. And with your camera, you can use typically, you can use a one-shot color if you want and have a digital camera like a mirrorless or a DSLR. You can use that as your camera. So a lot of times wide field imaging is a great way to get into astrophotography in general, because it's a less expensive in terms of you know, barrier to get in and learn the equipment. And it's talking about the weight of just a couple pounds of carrying around, so it's very minimal equipment. And then what's really fun with that is you can go outside and experience the night sky because you're there with it. It's pretty fun to have the equipment and shooting it. For the wide field, the biggest thing is kind of getting into those exposure times, like you were asking. You know, if you have a tracker, you can lower your ISO. And when you lower ISO, you're going to improve dynamic range, which is going to give you more colors. If you shoot 2 to 3 minute images, depending on your focal length and the polar alignment that you did, you can get some fantastic Milky Way photos. And even now with the winter Milky Way for us Northern Hemisphere folks, there's so much cool dark nebulae around Taurus and up in that region of the sky for wide angle. With this situation, I do recommend stopping down the lens if you have a lot of astigmatism. In a lot of these camera lenses, if you're shooting with, you know, a Canon, Nikon, Sony, a lot of these lenses aren't meant to be focusing pinpoint light. They're meant for kind of daytime. So some lenses are going to perform better for pinpoints, pin light that's coming in, the point source light, excuse me, that's coming in from the stars. So if you stop that lens from say 2.8 down to f4 or f5.6, yes, you're letting in less light, but then you're going to have better star performance on the corners of your images. So with that in mind, just go out there and shoot as many images as you can, with, again, following that histogram technique of just make sure that you shift your data about 1/3 to the left of that wall. And the left wall is that pure black, right? So you need to shift everything to the right just by 1/3. And then you know you have your exposure down. So another behind the scenes little shot. This was when I was still shooting with a Nikon. It was modified from Spencer's camera. This was one that we shot from a Texas observatory outside Fort Davis, Texas. And, you know, just we were working on an install and I set this thing up and I just let it run for a couple hours. And this was one of the first times I was able to actually get, you know, with a 50 millimeter lens, have a cool view of Orion and really get Barnard's Loop, you know, the Angelfish Nebula, the Rosette, all of those cool, beautiful Hygiene Alpha regions in the Witch Head. It's pretty neat what you can do and just go really deep on the wide field of just camera, lens, and a tracker. And, you know, with an intervalometer that is attached to that Nikon camera, you can let this thing shoot until the battery dies, right? You can shoot as many subs as possible and have some good data to edit. The Summer Triangle is another really cool one. You know, this is for us in the Northern Hemisphere. You know, we'll wait till, you know, June, July, August for really good views of this. But you have, you know, the Butterfly Nebula kind of hanging there by Satyr. This was down in West Virginia, and I pushed the colors really hard in a lot of these just to kind of show people the possibilities. But there's some green air glow in the night sky too. So a lot of us are removing that green air glow in the night sky in our deep space photos. But for me, I love having the air glow in it because it's an atmospheric phenomenon. I think it's such a cool thing to see in camera. So I kind of tend to leave it. But again, same exact camera setup as before. And this is only 30 minutes of data. It's just 10 3-minute images, a Nikon G6 with that 50 millimeter lens on a tripod. And you get that Milky Way, the dark nebulae, just kind of screaming right through the middle of the image. It's pretty fun. A lot of folks might have this kind of quintessential view of the Milky Way with the dark horse going to Rho Fuchsi and Antares with the Lagoon and Trifid hanging out there. But again, with this one, we had a band of green air glow because this was in Idaho. And with that time of year, the Milky Way kind of doesn't get too high in the sky. So we're imaging through a lot of a lot of atmosphere, but we also had green air glow, which was neat. So it was that image was just a single 3-minute image. So with those tracked images, we get a lot of detail and data out of the night sky. It's really fun to shoot with. This was the image I was kind of mentioning about, for Northern Hemisphere right now with winter. You have the California nebula and the Pleiades, and you have all this interconnected dark nebulae. It's pretty crazy. Again, these are images I shot a couple years ago, so I pushed them super, super hard. Definitely way more than I would go, than I would now. But to go back and re-edit data is always something fun to do once you have it. So the wide angle 50 millimeter lens again is really showing a lot of versatility in terms of just 45 minutes worth of images there, just 15 3-minute images with all the reflection nebula of the Pleiades hiding out, and the dark nebula and the hydrogen alpha of the California nebula there is pretty cool. A lot of hydrogen alpha going on in this one with the North American. You have a little bit of the veil there, the Sator region, the butterfly nebula. That is all super cool to shoot with a modified camera, or if you have a one-shot color, you're already perfect because those don't have the filters in place in terms of blocking, the wavelengths like a mirrorless or a DSLR would. So one-shot color shooting with this with a lens is super possible, like with the ZWO. With the ZWO 2600 one-shot color, a lot of those one-shot color cameras are really great, and benefit is they're going to look better because they're going to be cooled, so you have better noise performance. So that's I like showing off that region with the Milky Way, and just showing people the I guess I accidentally with this slide going into the next one of the row of view shy with the blue horsehead, that reflection nebula. We shot this on our workshop, but this time we used the ZWO AM5 mount, and with that we were able to do a lot of long deep exposures, and with a Rokinon 135 millimeter lens. So we were able to use a longer focal length, and we did a 2-panel mosaic. So with the portability, with the go-to functionality, that's what lets you do really cool things with excuse me, with the AM5. Oh, excuse me. With the AM5 mount, that one's really fun because you can shoot and do go-to. So with that mount, you have a lot of functionality with going to targets that, say, a Skywatcher doesn't allow you to do until now they have the GTI mount. So for those of you wanting the go-to capability, you can use the AM5. That's a good portable mount. We made a little note about wrapping all this stuff up and teaching people. We do a lot of workshops and like to share the experience. And Mount Rainier is a great place to share the night sky. The Milky Way is fantastic, and we like going there every year in July. So we teach people how to photograph wide-angle Milky Way shots and do nightscapes and time lapses and things like that still. So it's a great dark sky location for kind of tying all these skills together for people to experience the night sky and experience the dark Pacific Northwest Milky Way. And this area is one that we kind of hike up to. We take the students to shoot the Milky Way over the Tipsu or the Tatoosh mountain range, that in July they sometimes still have snow-capped peaks, which is pretty cool. And that was just a single 30-second exposure for that one. You can use nice leading lines to kind of showcase the path. You have reflections. We take the students to photograph Lake Tipsu here, which, if it's nice and calm, you can get the Milky Way reflecting over the lake and in the mountain range. And again, the air glow is just crazy at Mount Rainier. Sometimes it's spectacular. The green in that night sky from air glow is incredible. And just doing some of the daytime shooting and using, again, basic camera, lens, tripod, and getting people underneath the night skies at Mount Rainier. This was that lake where we did the Northern Lights photo, and is a great spot to get reflections in the morning when the water's calm. and of course, just the beautiful sunsets and things of Mount Rainier. It makes for a fun trip when we get good clear skies in the summer. But that's a fun class that some of you guys might be interested in checking out to kind of practice and get experience of photographing the night sky with your portable equipment. But I wanted to thank you guys for letting me be a part of the show again, and happy to answer any questions, and appreciate everyone's time today.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, that's fascinating. Something I always wanted to do, but we just don't live in that part of the world where you can. When you go up to Rainier, do you go up to Paradise in that region or someplace else?
Yeah, this shot was actually right up from Paradise. So that's the Paradise Lodge in this photo here. So down there, we go up to Paradise and we do a night of shooting there, and then we go and shoot Reflection Lakes area, and then on the third night of the workshop, we go over to Tipsu on the eastern side, and then we shoot the lake, and it's a little bit darker on the Tipsu side too. And we hope for the calm conditions so the students can photograph the Milky Way in the lake. It's a pretty cool scene if it's not windy.
And which direction is Seattle from where you're shooting?
So Seattle would be like behind to like the left and behind us. So to the right is actually looking towards like Yakima and all of that. So on this side, to the left out of the frame, kind of heading towards the double cluster and all that, was Seattle. So we're not facing Seattle in this image, so we kind of get away from the light pollution.
Alex, did you have other questions?
No, as a matter of fact, the exposure question came up a little earlier, and that was basically it to me. I haven't looked, and there have been a lot of comments about how people like the pictures and things like that, but I don't see that there's any questions. Did you notice anything, Molly?
I see a question about the version of the macro lens.
Yeah, Tarek has just asked one about is this the new version or the old version of the 100 macro lens?
Oh, is that for the Rokinon lens, the 135 millimeter lens?
No, the question in the chat is somebody else mentioned using a 100mm macro lens and getting pinpoint stars.
Oh, cool. I've not shot with a macro lens. That'd be neat to try, though.
Okay, I see. It was somebody else mentioned that they were using that lens, not you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you ever shoot with a fisheye lens?
I have not, but one of the fun things to do, like with just a 14 millimeter lens, you get better performance if you shoot multiple with a 14, like I did for that all sky, and it lets you get the fisheye effect, but then you have better performance from the lens is a little bit better, right? Fisheye lenses have a unique set of distortion, but it's still fun to shoot with. I mean, it's good for like kind of all sky, imaging.
And when you're stitching them together, there is a little parallax that you have to get rid of. So what software do you use to get rid of the parallax?
I use a Microsoft Ice. It'll kind of automatically do that. But as you saw, like especially that Milky Way photo from San Pedro with a big, huge arc, the Milky Way is not arcing like that in person, right? It's just because to make a flat image like that I wanted to print, because I turned that into a 3x2 print, but yet I could print it, like 30 by 40 some inches long. Then the software had to automatically bend it down. So not to say that that's a parallax effect, but haven't noticed it affecting the images too much as long as I shoot them pretty quickly in either Microsoft Ice to stitch, or there's PT GUI is kind of the other industry standard. PT GUI is just a little bit more finicky to use. Sometimes the control points could be tricky to use.
Yeah, we had someone on a couple of months ago that talked about using PT GUI.
Mm-hmm.
A couple more questions have popped up in the chat. Do you usually use an Astro modified camera or a regular camera for your nightscapes?
I'll use both, but I do have I have a Spencer's modified Sony A7S III, and then I have the same Spencer's modified A7 IV. And the A7 IV is just a little bit higher resolution, so it gives me better prints sometimes. But the A7S III, if I do a panorama, you can make really nice prints and just do it that way. But stock cameras are just as good. You'll notice a little bit of the HA response, but not as much as sending it out for modification. So I traditionally just use the modified ones, and they just pick up that HA just a little bit better, and they make it pop when you do your editing. So it's worth the investment to get them modified, and then you can make a custom white balance, and you can still shoot with them during the daytime.
Yeah, I'm
And-
planning on doing that to my D610 here, not too much time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Chris Levesque has also pointed out that you can use some one-shot color cameras for a lot of this too.
Yeah.
Astronomical cameras.
Yeah, he brought that
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, that was one that when we did our workshop this past year in Chile, a couple students were using the AM5 and the Rokinon lens, I believe, or maybe even a Red Cat, but they were using one-shot color. But I think the 2600, and it just blew my Sony out of the water. The resolution and the detail was the images were so much cleaner than the Sony, the non-cooled cameras. And they're just meant for it, right? So if you have the opportunity, if you have it in your wheelhouse already, the one-shot colors with the Canon lenses, I think ZWO has those Canon mounts that you can get and just put it on for back focus.
A lot of us have Samyang or Rokinon 135s. And I would
Yeah,
imagine if you
great.
bought the Samyang 14 millimeter f1.8, you could put it on the same mounting system that you've got, and you screw it in and go to
Yeah, it's
town.
been on my to-do list. And if you get the Nikon version of the lenses, Nikon has longer back focus than the Canon, so you can actually squeeze a filter drawer in there. Or at least with the 1600 and the 294 you can. With the 2600 you might have to remove the tilt plate, but then you can put in like duo narrowband filters and do narrowband stuff.
Yeah.
Matt, you mentioned your classes. If someone were interested in taking one of your classes, where would they go?
My website's just mattdieterich.com. And then the only other workshop that I have seats available for right now is the Mount Rainier workshop right now. And that's, I'll just put it back up on the screen again, but we have 2 seats left for that one. If people want to go experience the night skies at Mount Rainier, it's the weekend right after 4th of July. So I think it's like July 6th, but it's a 3-day workshop, and we're doing one in Chile, but that one got sold out pretty quick. And then next year we'll figure out maybe do another Chile workshop, and then probably another Mount Rainier or something in the United States. But I do have two seats left for this one if people want to experience the Pacific Northwest night skies with us. And we do photo editing classes during the daytime, so people come away with images to share. And the goal is that I want people to print their images, right, to hang them on the wall. So at the end of the class, everyone always has images that are ready to send to a printer.
Okay, it is Washington State, noted for its rain and clouds. And since I grew up there, I know that many times Mount Rainier is totally obscured. What do you do?
Yeah, surprisingly in July. So this is gonna be the 4th year of running the workshop. We only had one cloudy night in the last 4 years, and it was the last night of the previous workshop, and everyone was actually exhausted. So they were kind of happy that they had a little bit of a reprieve. So we go in July. In July, they typically have traditionally, and knock on wood, clear weather in July. So, but if it is cloudy, then we do photo editing, and then we do landscape photography, and do like the moody Pacific Northwest landscape style shooting. So there's always something that we make use of, so people are learning and coming away with new skills on the class.
And you do that.
There's
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mirror 222 wants to know about your printing your photos. How do you get your photos printed?
I like using what is it, MPix. They're in Pittsburgh, Kansas. I've used them for a lot of the prints. They do a great job with printing any of these nightscapes like this, as long as make sure everyone edits on a calibrated monitor, because if you're not editing on a calibrated monitor, your darks and your lights are going to be really skewed. So when you start printing, you'll notice that if you have issues with too dark or too light, I learned the hard way with that, of not editing on a calibrated monitor 10 years ago, and the print came back super dark. So but MPix Pro, I think it's Miller's, they do a really good job, or Bay Photo, they're also really renowned as well for good prints.
There's a question here from Christopher Levesque, and I think you're only half the answer. He wants to know if can I, or do I have to bring my wife? And you can answer for your perspective.
Oh,
She might have a different perspective. So
well, I bring my wife and stuff, but she usually goes and hangs out with her aunt and uncle that live in the area. But people are allowed to bring their wives and stuff. If they're going to be shooting with a camera, then we would just have to talk, and usually that would mean a second seat. But we have had people bring their significant others, and they hang out on the class. And even one guy, the wife was in the class, and the husband brought a telescope. So we kind of did some stargazing, and he joined in on our photo editing and stuff. But there's still stuff for them to do during the daytime. But it's something that people commonly do. They bring their significant other on the workshop. But if they shoot, then it would just be two workshop seats.
So you guys all stay at the same hotel or something up there? What's happening?
We stay, we grabbed an Airbnb, but students get to pick their location around the Ashford area. Some people like staying up at Mount Rainier at Paradise or Longmire. And then we edit down at the one Airbnb, or traditionally we've stayed at Whitaker's bunkhouse. They have a nice yurt, and it's a big air conditioned yurt for doing our photo editing. So that's what we've done the last few times. But this time we might just do the photo editing out of the Airbnb that I rented. It's a nice big spot for us to kind of spread out, and everyone has their laptops, and we go through to make sure everyone has training on editing the images that we shot the night before.
Okay, and it looks like we've got more information from Christopher Levick about his significant other. Apparently her name is Nina.
There you go.
Even regarding printing,
my
even
significant
with a
other.
calibrated monitor, I find it's always a decent idea to get 4x6 prints as a test and take a look at them, because there's always a little tweaking, whether you're going to have it done, say I print mine on aluminum, or whether you have them printed on some kind of paper, or no matter what you do, I think it's a trial small print is always, worth the investment. They don't cost that much.
Yeah.
There was a question earlier from Tarek about have you ever tried using or is there any utility in using a tilt shift lens for getting cool nightscape photos?
I mean, by all means, with any of this kind of photography, like try stuff out and experiment, right? Because I think a lot of us find ourselves like, I see a photo, so I want to try to emulate it, right? I'm not very creative with thinking outside the box. So I recommend people to think outside the box and try it. I've never shot with a tilt shift. I know those are lenses that are good for like architecture and interior, but I just don't know how the performance would be for night skies until someone actually shoots with one.
Well, it's not like there are any rules.
There's no rules.
There's no rules. It's if you like the effect,
Mhm.
then go for it.
Yep.
So, any more questions?
There's some chit chat, but I think we captured all the questions.
So I think we're coming to the end of our program. Matt, thanks so much for coming. And sounds like maybe in maybe another year we can have you back again. You have some new stuff to present to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're
Maybe
always
we'll
welcome
talk
to
about the Sea West side and all the observatory work that we do. It was either going to be that or this, but Tim recommended chit chat about the Widefield and Nightscapes and stuff. Just to kind of change it up a bit. So maybe next time we'll do observatory design, build, and kind of construction side. That'd be neat.
Yeah, that's cool.
Matt, a question snuck in while we were saying bye-bye here. And then I want to make a comment about the workshop coming up. What do you use for your monitors to calibrate?
I have a color. Let me see what's sitting in front of me. The X-Rite Color Monkey display, and it actually monitors the ambient light. So it's going to dim the brightness of my screen automatically if I flip on the light or if it's daytime, because that's what's important is the ambient light. It's going to change the brightness of your screen so it keeps you within a good range of printing your photo. But there's like this Color Monkey or something, I think it's called. And then I think Spider makes some of them too, right? The good screen calibrators.
Okay.
Yeah, I use X-Rite, but you know, a reflective surface is never going to be quite the same as a backlit monitor, no matter what you do.
I'm going to share my screen here. How do I do that? Let me see. It's been a while.
While he does that, I
there
just
it
shared a
goes.
link of a show where one of the things that was talked about was a decent section on screen calibration that Tim Hutchison talked about. I just shared
Tim
that
did
link
one.
in there to go check it out.
Here you see the TAIC workshop that we've got coming up in a couple of months. Be on March 31st is the time we're going to be showing it, I believe. You got to get your workshop stuff in by the 17th. Eric Cole. That's right. Eric Cole, right? Or is it Cole? Never mind. I'm very bad today. He has given us a set of data, and you can go down and download his data by hitting that zip file right there. And then you can submit your finished image here, and be sure you try to get it in by the 17th of March. And then we're going to put it together as we have done in past shows. For those of you who have never seen these shows, you just go to the TAIC workshop or the website, and you pull up TAIC workshop, grab yourself some files. And for those of you who just want to practice on some really good data sets, we've done the show 6 or 8 times with different data sets. So go grab it, and that will stop my sharing and leave it back to you guys.
And I don't want to have a commercial for my own data, but that data includes some luminosity data with and without that great supernova that appeared 10 days after I stopped shooting. So you can get to do both images if you want, with and without the supernova.
You can stop sharing, Alex.
Oh, I'm trying. Oh, well, how do you do that? There you go.
All right. I think we're all done. Again, Matt, thanks so much for your presentation. We all enjoyed it. And I think you kept your audience right to the end, which is always
Thanks for having me,
sign.
guys. Yeah.
So if we're all set, so we'll say goodnight, everyone. We'll see you next week, which Tim's going to give not our Tim. Okay, Alex, you can stop.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
It's the painkillers, guys. It's the painkillers.
I know.
Good night, guys. Have a good one.
Good night.